a couple issues you have to be aware of with oxygen, particularly around Lyme disease. The first one is a potential Herxenheimer reaction when you start, or a die-off reaction, or a detox reaction. So as I mentioned, Lyme can't live in an oxygen-rich environment. So it will actually kill Lyme disease when you introduce oxygen. So number one, if you go too fast, too soon, you can kill too much. Number two, you can overload, even if you don't, you can overload your elimination organs because you have all these cells that have all this waste product built up in the cell walls. And if you start detoxing too quickly, all of a sudden, boom, your elimination organs are overloaded and you just feel like trash. So the answer to that, obviously, is start slow, listen to your body, and work up.
Hello, welcome back to the Integrative Health Podcast with Dr. Jen. Today, we're going to talk about someone who dealt with stealth infections, actually was very sick, and what he used to thrive again. So this is going to be such a great episode to learn. Today, we're talking to Brad Pitzel. After a lifetime of strange medical conditions, Brad was finally diagnosed with an autoimmune arthritis in 2010. Then Brad began traditional treatments until he was diagnosed with malignant melanoma in 2014. Realizing that all the treatments had higher risk of cancer, Brad was determined to find a better way. On his healing journey, he discovered that he had Lyme disease and a co-infection called Bartonella. Brad's health continued to decline to the point where he could barely walk. He had severe brain fog and chronic fatigue issues. In 2016, his doctor recommended he either try hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT, or exercise with oxygen therapy, EWOT. After researching, Brad decided to try EWOT, but he decided he didn't have enough confidence in what was being sold in the marketplace at the time. So he built his own. A year later, showing great improvements in his health, his doctor asked him if he would start making these systems for his patients, and 1,000 Roads was born with the mission of bringing down the price of EWOT so that more people could benefit from it. So this is amazing. We're so excited to hear more about your journey. And this is what's so great is you took something very hard and very bad and you made it into something good. So welcome, Brad. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about your health journey and how it all happened. It seems like you started with conventional treatments because you had melanoma, which wasn't it just melanoma awareness day recently?
I think that's right. Actually, my symptoms started in childhood. I started to develop psoriasis, and then I developed all sorts of other weird symptoms that came and went throughout childhood and high school and even college. And I started to pick up other autoimmune diseases like Raynaud's syndrome and other things along the way, but none of them were, life changing. It wasn't until maybe, I guess it would have been about 2010 or 2011, I developed arthritis. And at the time, it was referred to as psoriatic arthritis, which is the type of arthritis you get when you have psoriasis. It looks just like rheumatoid arthritis, but it can happen. It's not symmetric. So it might happen in one hand and not the other, or one foot, not the other, sort of thing. And so they started to put me on all the conventional treatments. And yeah, I was just going down that path. Obviously, it was kind of scary. Autoimmune diseases, especially arthritis, is kind of a big one. And it was, at the beginning, it was impacting me a little bit. And then I started to get on these drugs. And after I found one that started to work for me, I started to get better, and they would work for about 6 months. But when they would wear off, I would be in a worse place. And then they would double the dosage and it would start working mostly again. But then in another 6 months, same thing. It would, it was kind of, I was in a worse situation. And then finally, the end of that conveyor belt was, as you said, I went to the doctor and I had melanoma, and it was malignant. And I was frightened, obviously. I had young children. I was a sole breadwinner. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went back to my rheumatologist and I just said, hey, I'm kind of in a bind here. If I take these drugs, I'm likely to get a reoccurrence of cancer and die. And if I don't take these drugs, I'm gonna die of the autoimmune disease and in a lot of pain. I'm like, so where do we go from here? And he's like, well, we'll just try another drug. And, obviously I read up on the drug this time much more deeply, and the drug had similar risks. And I was like, gosh, I don't like either path A or path B. I need to find a path C. And that's kind of when I started to head off the path of traditional medicine and try to find the root cause of my issues. It was a long journey. I mentioned the arthritis came in 2010, the cancer or 11, I think it was late 10 or so. And then the cancer diagnosis was in 2014. And that's when I really started looking to alternate medicine. And it wasn't until maybe 2017 I was finally diagnosed with Lyme, and I was kind of shocked. The doctor was trying I was seeing this holistic doctor, and he was trying a variety of things that were having no benefit. I was doing my own research and trying a bunch of things on my own with no benefit. And he said, let's test you for Lyme. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't have Lyme. I never got bit by a tick. Never had that bullseye rash. I'm certain it's not Lyme, but I'm like, well, I'll pay the money. And I think it was $500 for that test. I was like, I guess I'll pay the $500 just to convince the doctor that I don't have it, so we can move on and go find the real root cause of what's going on here. And he came back and he said, hey, Brad, you have Lyme disease. And I said, I have Lyme. I said, could that be a false positive? And he said, well, it's a urine PCR test, which means you've got the DNA of the Lyme disease bacteria in your urine. What do you think? I was like, oh, I have Lyme disease. Well, that's surprising. But I think having a label and knowing what it was, in some ways it was scary because everything you hear about Lyme disease for certain, but in some ways it was relieving. Well, at least I have a name to this beast, and now I can Google around and see what it is and how people are handling it and what the prognosis is, and kind of get a little more focused on my efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And me, when I look at what your health history was, I mean, the Lyme was probably in childhood when you got bit, playing around, all of that. And that is what disrupted the immune system. And one autoimmune disease leads to another. And then cancer is breakdown of our immune system too, basically. So you can see it lining up. And it's hard because there's so many other things that were probably thrown at you, antibiotics, food, there's so many things, because I have similar childhood, history where I had an autoimmune disease diagnosed early adulthood, but pretty young. So it's hard when you look back. And then you are at this spot because now, like you said, you actually have a root cause. Because when you were going to the rheumatologist, they were like, here's a drug and here's a drug. And I have a few patients that we're still working on those other issues, and they want some conventional medicine. And same thing, the drug for Crohn's, it doesn't, it stops working after a while. And the doctor's like, yeah, that happens. And we just give you another drug. And that's just not the answer. That's not what God intended. And that's not looking at the root cause. So now you have this Lyme diagnosis. Now, okay, my mind goes to, you're doing all of this while you have malignant melanoma plus autoimmune diseases. Like, this is all going on at the same time. You're not getting any therapy for that right now?
Not anymore,
This time?
no. Oh, at
No, I
this
mean,
time,
at that
no.
time when you started.
No, they did a biopsy and then went back and did a revision to it to remove the melanoma. And I was lucky. I believe they took it all out, but the likelihood of it reoccurring, I was told, was very high, 50% or more. So it was just one of these things where it was like, keep going to the dermatologist, which I went to the dermatologist for many years, and they would look at every mole and freckle on my body, and then they would cut some off. Even at one point, the dermatologist had me bring pictures of my skin, but pictures of me where I was like in bathing suit so she could look at my torso. And she found a spot where I used to have a mole and I didn't, and she even cut that spot just to be safe, sort of thing. So there was a lot of surgeries and vigilance
Wow.
and concern, obviously.
Yeah. So then how did you start? You said you had the diagnosis, you started researching alternative treatments.
Yes. I tried so many things, I've probably forgotten 75% of the things I've tried, but I've done diet. Yes, I did antibiotics. I've done herbs in various forms, liposomal herbs. I've tried frequency medicine and saunas and ozone and gosh, so much more. Like many of us who've had Lyme, you throw everything at it, sometimes all at once, sometimes a little bit more judicious or scientific about it, but just depends where your mental health is at the time and your urgency. But it was funny towards the end of even in the traditional medicine. So I had arthritis, but then as it got worse, I started to get this really bad stiffness in the back of my legs. It felt like I had just gotten done running 3 ultra marathons when I got up every morning. And just the Bartonella pain in my feet were just outrageous. I could barely walk. Like if I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I had to put a pair of shoes on just to go from my bed to the toilet because my feet hurt so bad. And I went back to the rheumatologist early on. I said, "Hey, is this arthritis?" And he just looked at me like, "Are you crazy? No, we don't know what this is." And I was like, "Well, clearly this is all related." But inside their box, it's like arthritis is this, whatever that is a new name with a new title, and I don't know about that one. And I started to research. I tried all sorts of things. This doctor at one point, he said, "Hey, he had me trying different things. I'd been on autoimmune paleo diet, which is very restrictive. Um, as I joked, I tried to remove anything from my life that brought me joy. Even as went so far as no coffee. I said no coffee. Eventually, a few years later, I cheated and started drinking green tea. I figured there's enough health benefits there that he couldn't yell at me, but very
Too
restrictive.
restrictive. Yeah, too restrictive. And I found that like stresses the body out more and doesn't allow the gut to heal. So that's another stressful thing that you were going through.
Right. And I mean, I was a single breadwinner and I have 3 kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I'm, too disabled to even, provide for my family. So at one point he's like, okay, we're getting the big guns out and we're going to try some ozone therapy, where MAH, where they inject it into your blood and send it through UV and all that good stuff. He's like, this is going to be amazing. I did it and I had no benefit. And I was just so scared. I was so scared. I was like, he just pulled out his quote nuclear option, and I didn't even flinch. It did nothing. Um, so at one point he said, as you mentioned in the intro, he said, well, he almost like this is his Hail Marys, like, Brad, you need to do hyperbaric or you need to do EWOT, which I had never heard of. So I first said, well, I'm going to do hyperbaric. I've heard of that. And so I researched it, and it was super expensive. We live in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And he's like, look, you can get like a half price deal if you're willing to go out to Florida. And I know this clinic in Florida, which was still tens of thousands of dollars plus of air flight, plus you had to do it for maybe 7 weeks or something. So you have to find housing and probably rent a car. It's like, so it probably wasn't a whole lot of savings. And I was like, I can't. And it's the protocol for hyperbaric for Lyme. You can't do the soft shell things you do in your home that you see LeBron James doing. You need to do the hard shell, the
Yes.
the heavy
Yes.
hitter. That is,
That's an
yeah,
important point to talk about.
yep,
The ones that if you can't be on your cell phone inside of them,
yep.
because it would catch fire. My husband and I talk a lot about that. He's like, those aren't really hyperbaric chambers. And I'm like, yeah, some benefit, but not like you were saying, not the real ones.
And we can talk about that. I can go into that a little bit more. But he's like, you need to go do the hard shell. And that's in a doctor's office under medical supervision. You need a prescription, which he was willing to write me. Several weeks, 7 days a week, 90 minutes inside of that hyperbaric chamber at pressure, which means 90 minutes plus the time to pressurize and depressurize, plus the time to get to the doctor's office. It was probably a 2.5, 3 hour ordeal start to finish each day. And I was just like, I'm fighting for my job right now. I don't think I have 3 hours to give. And I'm sure the doctor's office is going to want to do it during business hours. So that's just not going to work for me. So I immediately knew I was kind of crestfallen. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. So I said, okay, let's look at this EWOT thing, which I had never heard of. And there were a few providers on the marketplace. Their branding and all of the language on their website seemed like it was filled with hyperbole. It just like it was slick marketing, hyperbole. It just wasn't, I didn't believe in it. I was just like, man, I don't believe in it. It was like $5,000 to $25,000 for these systems. So I said, I can't, if I could just throw $10,000 at every experiment, health and wellness experiment that companies want me to spend, like, that'd be great. But I just, this one doesn't feel like I have the faith. I've done too many things that haven't worked to go throw that kind of money around. So I did some more research on it, and I realized that with some work, I could probably make my own, and I did. So I made my own, and it took a couple months to get everything together. And then I started using it. And about a year later, I went back to the doctor for a checkup. And he's like, wow, you're looking a lot better. And he's like, what are you using the oxygen? I said, I am. He's like, which one? I said, I'm doing EWOT. And he said, oh, great. Who did you buy it from? So I can tell my other patients. And I said, I just made my own, doc. And he looked at me shocked and he said, would you consider making them for my patients? At the moment I was a lot better, but I wasn't fully well, and I was still fighting for my job and still had a young family and so much going on. I was like, that's an interesting one, but I'm not sure. I'm like, I want to focus more on, getting myself fully back. And, probably 6 months after that, I was feeling well enough. I was like, you know what, maybe that is an interesting sort of thing, an interesting way I can kind of give back after having been through all this. And you just feel like you're kind of walking through the jungle alone a little bit. And so that's kind of what the birth of the company was like, hey, maybe we can do something and kind of bring the science of EWOT forward and kind of make the company a little bit more transparent and less about marketing. So that was the birth of our company and kind of our mission as well.
That's amazing. And could you explain a little bit about the science of how our bodies use oxygen and how it changes as we age, as a little background to what EWOT is?
Absolutely. So first off, what is EWOT? It's really pretty simple. All you do is you do like 15 minutes of cardiovascular exercise while you're breathing near pure oxygen through a mask. And that's it. So it's something you can do in your home, and it's just 15 minutes a day. And I think that's one of the powers of it. So as far as the science of EWOT goes, what happens is every year past the age of 25, our body loses 1% of the ability to utilize oxygen, which over time, that 1% adds up. And as we get older and older, becomes more and more obvious to us. We have less energy, we have more inflammation, etc. Because the science is pretty clear about oxygen. Anywhere in your body you have low oxygen, the scientific term they use is hypoxia. Anywhere you have hypoxia, you have inflammation. And anywhere you have inflammation, you have hypoxia. So they're two sides of the same coin. And so this 1% a year of reduction of oxygen is also causing more and more inflammation. And so nowadays we use the term inflammaging, as if we're all supposed to get more and more inflamed as we get older. Now, there was a gentleman in the 1960s and 70s who started doing research on oxygen with exercise. And what he discovered was, by doing this protocol that we now know as the EWOT protocol, that he could reverse this loss of oxygen in people and bring their cardiovascular system back to a more youthful state. And so, and he had like elderly folks doing it even just for 2 and 3 sessions. And he came back and measured them many weeks later and noticed that the benefits they got from EWOT were enduring. So that was the birth of EWOT, and the whole industry was like, hey, 15 minutes of exercise with near pure oxygen reverses this inflammaging inside our cardiovascular system. And that is the jumping off point, but that's not all the benefits of it. When you're talking about tick-borne diseases, Lyme disease, and all of its co-infections, if you think about it, there's a few key pillars of the disease you need to fight. One is we have runaway inflammation. And as we discussed, inflammation means low oxygen, hypoxia. So obviously giving your body oxygen helps quench that inflammation. Better yet, when we're pairing it with the synergies of exercise, we're able to get that oxygen more deeply into the tissues, because obviously your heart's beating faster and harder, your blood vessels are dilating, and really all of your cells are thirsting for that oxygen. So there's all these physiological changes that make it more receptive to bring in the oxygen in. And so it helps with inflammation. The other thing it helps with cellular energy. So when your body is not getting enough, or even take it to a lower level, if a cell is not getting enough oxygen, it switches from what's called aerobic respiration, where it produces energy with oxygen, to anaerobic respiration, which is burning glucose without oxygen. And the amount of energy that a cell can produce without oxygen is about 6% of the level it can produce with oxygen. So very low efficiency. And when you have inflammation, that means you have low oxygen. All the cells around that inflammation are in a low energy state. And the challenge with that is, when a cell's at this lower energy state, it stops doing a lot of non-essential functions, including taking out the trash. So when you go through this anaerobic respiration, you produce a lot of metabolic waste products, a lot more. Not only is it lower energy, you're producing more waste, and that waste just builds up inside the cell wall. And so now you've got this body that's toxified and it's at a lower energy state. And that includes various components of your body. Every system in your body is made of cells, including your immune system. So your immune system is also at a lower state. So that's why Lyme and Bartonella and Babesia try to create inflammation. It weakens the body, it weakens the immune system, it weakens the defenses, and makes the real estate more comfortable for the infectious agent. And so when we're flooding our body with oxygen, we're reversing those dynamics. We're turning off the inflammation it uses. We're ramping up the immune system. We're detoxifying all of that stuff that's been building up in our cell walls and inside of our blood, because oxygen is a very powerful detoxifier. As a matter of fact, most of these complex chemicals we have in our body that need to be excreted through our various excretory systems, they need oxygen to break it down through a process called oxidation. And basically all that is oxygen combines with that more complex chemical and breaks it into simpler chemicals that our kidneys and our liver and our elimination organs can remove from our body. So that's kind of what's great about EWOT for me, is that scientifically it's able to bring up our immune system, bring down the inflammation, and help us detoxify and give us more energy. And that's energy that we feel. It gets rid of the brain fog. It clears our head. It allows us to make it through the day, which was always a challenge for me at the worst points and even some of the not so terrible points. But also energy for all of our body systems, whether it be your kidneys able to do their job, your heart, your liver, skin repair, etc. All of that happens. It's much more efficient when we have the energy. So that's the science.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are there, I guess, are there any negatives to this? Like, could there be any side effects for introducing pure oxygen like this?
It's a great question. There's only really a couple issues you have to be aware of with oxygen, particularly around Lyme disease. The first one is a potential Herxenheimer reaction when you start, or a die-off reaction, or a detox reaction. So, as I mentioned, Lyme can't live in an oxygen-rich environment. So it will actually kill Lyme disease when you introduce oxygen. So number one, if you go too fast, too soon, you can kill too much. Number two, you can overload, even if you don't, you can overload your elimination organs because you have all these cells that have all of this waste product built up in the cell walls. And if you start detoxing too quickly, all of a sudden, boom, your elimination organs are overloaded and you just feel like trash. So the answer to that, obviously, is start slow, listen to your body, and work up. I always tell folks, with Lyme disease, we never want to go running, screaming through the front door. We kind of want to go creeping in through the back door. We don't want it to know we were doing something new. We just, it's like boiling the frog. You start out and you just slowly increase the pressure and on the disease. So that's the first risk you have to be aware of. The other risk with oxygen in general, you may have heard of oxygen toxicity. So if there's a diver and they're spending many hours undersea breathing pure oxygen, they can get oxygen toxicity. And what this essentially is the oxygen gets trapped in the bloodstream and it can't get out, and it causes problems. And that can happen with oxygen. However, with exercise with oxygen therapy, it cannot happen. And there's a couple reasons why it can't. The first reason is we have a reservoir that has a fixed amount of oxygen. It's 1,000 liters. And 1,000 liters is not enough oxygen to give you oxygen toxicity. And the second reason is, even if we could make that reservoir 10 times as large, you still couldn't get oxygen toxicity because you're exercising. And when you're exercising, you're producing a massive amount of carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, we often think of as like a waste product that our body just needs to eliminate through our lungs. And it is. However, it also has a secondary purpose, which is it creates pressure inside of our circulatory system that drives the oxygen out and into the cells. And so when you're exercising, you actually can't overdo oxygen. So oxygen toxicity is a non-issue for exercise with oxygen therapy. And then the only other risk is oxygen is a flame accelerator. It's not flammable like gasoline. You can't turn oxygen into a blowtorch or something like that. I could put a lighter to the end of the hose we use and it's not going to start shooting fire. But if you had a fire going, it would make it burn hotter and faster. So the only requirement is we tell folks you got to keep it away from your gas appliances, your stove, your furnace, your water heater. You want to keep it at least 10 feet away from those. And you don't want to be smoking or have any sources of ignition. I do also tell folks, however, if you had a flame in your house that was large enough to burn through our reservoir and release that oxygen, you already have a big problem in your house. And obviously you probably don't want to be in that room, and you probably didn't want to be in that room either way. But yeah, that's really it. So it's very safe. And the major risk is just when you're starting that you could you could have a detox reaction if you start too hard and fast. You're on mute. I'm sorry, Jen, I can't hear you.
So it definitely, right, like the Herx reaction could be a little bit scary because if you're not detoxified, also your liver, your stool, like all that is flowing. You should definitely do that first and take that time, kind of like you to get everything else working properly and detoxify the best you could, and then start on EWOT. So
So
what
the
oh, sorry, go ahead.
The one thing I would add to that is, so what we normally have people do to get over to avoid the detox reactions, you just start slow. Maybe you start by just breathing the oxygen on day one and build up your time, and then you add a couple of minutes of exercise at the end of it, and then you start building more and more time into the exercise component until you get to 15 minutes. What people find though is after they get past that first week or two and they get themselves up, EWOT flips and it becomes a really great detoxifier. So if something else is causing the Herxenheim reaction, they'll often use EWOT to stop that reaction or reduce it greatly.
Oh, that's awesome. And so your company, first of all, how did you get the name for that 1000 Nerds?
Yeah, it was really paying homage to everyone's individual health journey and recognizing that a journey for one is a journey for one. There's not a one size fits all, and we don't, claim to be a one size fits all sort of solution. But it was also the hope that we could pay it forward 1,000 times. We've all walked through what I call the jungle alone, and when you have something like this, and so being able to give forward to many other people is my way of making purpose out of the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what makes your company unique is that people can do it at their home, because that's one problem that I find with working with different, busy mothers, like you said, people that are working a 9 to 5, they can't take off work to go feel better, yet they feel so bad at home, but they can't do anything because everything's closed. So how much room does this take up at their house? And, how affordable is it compared to going to, say, a wellness center for this therapy?
Yeah, you're right. So our goal was to make it affordable so you could bring it into your home, because the power of any oxygen therapy is, or pretty much anything we do, is consistency over time. And that's very much true with EWOT, because what we find is that people can continue to get incremental benefits well into their third year. And so our goal in bringing a new customer in is always to set them up for success so they can get to that level. So as far as space requirement, first you need a piece of cardio equipment, and that's your choice. It can be a treadmill, it can be an exercise bike. Sometimes when folks are very sick and they start out, they might start by standing on a vibration plate, doing this gentle stretching, doing one of those little pedal bikes where you sit on a chair and pedal on it, or anything to get your heart rate up a little bit. The equipment.
Okay, can I ask you, so that's enough? Like what parameters, I guess, are you looking for? So that, like you said, depending on how sick they are, but what would be, I guess, if someone is really toxic, like Sears, like, can't get out of bed, versus someone that is optimized, but not 100%, like what heart rate range would they want to be in?
That's a great question. So our eventual goal is to get you to 70 to 80% of your theoretical max heart rate. So for folks who don't know that, the way you calculate that is you take the number 220, you subtract your age, and that's your theoretical max heart rate. And then you can multiply that by 70% or 80%. That's where we want you to end up. We feel like that's the peak benefits of EWOT. However, I always tell folks, perfection is the enemy of progress in this game. And the amazing thing about EWOT is it's going, number one is many of us feel like we're too sick to exercise. And when I first started, you forget so many of the things you go through, but I saw a picture a few months ago that I'd forgotten. When I first started exercising, the Bartonella foot pain was so bad. I was using an elliptical and I had like these 1.5 inch thick gardening pads on the pedals between me and the shoes, because I couldn't even stand to push on the pedals. It hurt so bad. So I always tell folks, you got to start where you are. So if that's walking on a treadmill or walking in place or just doing gentle stretching to start, that's okay to start. the first thing folks notice when they exercise with oxygen is the exercise is easier. So let's say you were exercising on an exercise bike today and you were at like a level 5, and then you put the oxygen mask on, you would feel like 5 is no longer giving you good exercise, and you might need to take it up to 6 or 7 to have that same perceived effort. So it immediately makes exercise easier. And in addition to that, it greatly improves your cardiovascular conditioning very quickly. Olympic athletes and professional athletes use EWOT all the time to improve their performance. For us, we're not trying to get back to running marathons. Most of us just want to get back to living a normal life, but know that your cardiovascular conditioning will greatly improve. So if we have you starting at something that's relatively low level, that's okay. Your energy status is going to improve. Some of your pains are going to start to go away. Your conditioning is going to improve. And just naturally, you're going to start to want to push yourself a little bit more and a little bit more. And then it could be 3 months, could be 6 months, whatever it takes you to get there. All of a sudden, there you are doing 15 minutes at 70 or 80% without a problem. And kind of shocking yourself, saying, I didn't think I'd do this at the beginning of it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so let's go back how you said that athletes use this. So kind of makes me feel crazy that, athletes use this to just improve their performance, their VO2 max. We know VO2 max is important for longevity.
Yes.
Yet, why isn't there one of these in every single hospital, every single outpatient, therapy center, physical therapy center? So for me, it's frustrating because it works. You're passionate about this. Why isn't this in every street corner? And I know that's why you created your company, to make it affordable. But it's frustrating, right?
Yeah. So the business model in the EWOT industry, when we launched, was really, they were primarily selling to cardio or chiropractors and like cryo clinics and doctors' offices, who were then turning around and selling it as a service. So that's why they could charge, $20,000 for a unit. That office would make back that money pretty quickly. And our goal is, well, hey, if we bring down the price of these things, then the demand will be much greater, and then more people can afford it. And so that was kind of a flip. And that is really our goal. There's not too many people in America who are healthy enough to move, or the world, who couldn't benefit from this. We're helping folks, not just with Lyme disease, we're helping people recover from cancer. Oxygen is very anti-cancer. We're helping folks recover from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cognitive decline, strokes, CTE, autoimmune conditions of various sorts, long COVID, you name it. So there's no one who couldn't benefit from more oxygen. And every doctor you've ever seen has had to read the physiology textbook by a doctor named Arthur Gurian. And so this textbook's 50 years old, and every doctor's, it's standard
I have
issue.
it.
Yep. And
I can see the cover. It's like orangish and like a ugly orange color and blue. Anyway, I have one of the editions in my barn now. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things he says is, at the root of it, every disease's cause is a lack of oxygen. So there you have it. I mean, so to your point, why isn't it available to more folks? I'm unaware, but that's kind of our goal and our mission. And we're helping a ton of folks with all sorts of chronic conditions.
Yeah. So say someone's listening and they're going to go to your website. You just Google 1000 roads. It comes up. I was doing it during our chat. And because I'm like, I want to see how affordable. I think it's affordable, but I have some questions about it. So you buy the machine, the device, and then how do you get the oxygen?
Great question. So an EWOT system comprises of a device called an oxygen concentrator that produces oxygen. What it does is it takes the oxygen in the air, which is at about 21% at sea level, a little bit less up in the mountains, and it purifies it to 93% oxygen, separating the oxygen from the nitrogen and the argon in the air, and just allowing 93% oxygen through. And then we take that oxygen and we fill a large reservoir, as I was mentioning earlier, that's about 1,000 liters. So our reservoir, you were asking size, is about 6 feet wide, 5.5 feet tall, and it's on a stand. And then when it's fully inflated, it looks like a big balloon. When it's fully inflated, it's probably about 2.5 or 3 feet thick. So it's 1,000 liters. If you think about a 2-liter bottle of soda, it's 50 of those worth of oxygen. The reason why we do, and then so the device fills the reservoir, and then the reservoir has a hose that hooks up to a mask that you wear when you exercise. And the reason for the reservoir is the devices we sell 2 systems, one that produces 5 liters of oxygen a minute and the other that produces 10 liters of oxygen per minute. Now, when you're exercising, you can use easily 50 or 60 liters of oxygen a minute. So the way we solve that without having you buy a whole host of these machines and trying to gang them together and not blow your circuit is we use that reservoir as a buffer. So you turn on this machine, it filters out the oxygen, fills this reservoir, and then subsequent to filling the reservoir, you can plug in your mask and do your 15 minutes.
Cool. So say someone's listening, maybe even I'm thinking about this, and wow, this would be good for my kids that are athletes. My one son that has mild pandas from a mold injury in preschool. I want to work on my VO2 max. Oh, and I have Lyme from childhood for sure. So I'm thinking about that. Well, so what do you do? Everyone gets a different mask, or how can you use this in a family to benefit everyone?
Absolutely. So the masks are sized, excuse me, we have 3 different mask sizes that fit the vast majority of folks. And we do recommend everyone get their own mask. You're gonna be sweating in it and maybe spitting in it. And so even no matter how intimate you are, you may not want to share that with someone. But in cases where people are budget constrained, if they have the same size space, they can also just wash the mask with warm soapy water, drip dry it, and reuse it. But most folks get their own mask. And the great thing about it is that the mask has this 5-way Velcro adjustable harness to get it to just fit you right. It's a very comfortable mask. And then you can clip in and out of it. So if it's just your mask, you adjust it once, and then it's very fast to clip it on and off and get going. It takes you 10 seconds. And I'm a firm believer that if we can make things convenient and remove the friction of trying to do it, then you're more likely to do it. And as I said, our goal is to get you to do it over a long period of time because you're going to see great benefits. And that sounds harder than it is. Oftentimes I have folks come to us at the beginning, like, I don't know if I'm going to want to exercise, and I'm certainly not going to want to, can I be done with this in a couple months? And then I have these folks sometimes come back and be like, I never want to stop doing this. I feel so great. It gives me so much energy, it clears my head. Just so many things. So it becomes part of your lifestyle. But in Lyme disease, and you were alluding to this, I always talk about what I call the ceremonies. The ceremonies that took up all my time. I got to count the pills every morning or night. I've got to go in the sauna for just 20 minutes, and then go do the Rife machine for 30 minutes, and then go do this thing, and go do gotta go to the doctor and get the ozone shot. All these ceremonies, and trying to get yourself better. None of them are massive in of themselves usually, but they just add up, and eventually it becomes so much that it's a breaking point for folks who are like, yeah, I spend 6 hours doing all this stuff, and yeah, I think I feel a little better, but like no quality of life. I've spent all my free time trying to get myself to a place where I can feel normal for a moment, or closer to normal. And I think that's the great thing about this is it is just 15 minutes. And it's something you can do in your own home. There's no travel. And it does so many things. It's going to help kill the Lyme. It's going to help get rid of the inflammation. And it's going to help detoxify you. So you kind of get a multi benefit in 15 minutes. So.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And I just love your passion that you saw a problem and you wanted to give a solution to help others and help others feel better. So it's really awesome. And I think it's a great therapy. I haven't recommended it to many patients, and I think I will now. So I think this is amazing, and it's very doable. Like you said, it's it's not asking too much. It's, hyperbaric can be very difficult, and very expensive too. So thank you so much, Brad, for sharing your story and your passion. I'm sure our listeners have a bunch of questions. I'm sure that they will want to know how they can do this. What are the protocols? Everything. So can you tell our listeners how to find you?
Sure. You can go to our website, 1000 THOUSAND roads, ROADS.com, 1000roads.com. And if you have any questions, there's a contact page on there. You can send us an email or give us a call, and we'd be happy to chat with you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you're just feeling so much better and rocking everything now. Doing an awesome business.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate your time.
Of course.